Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. A little late tonight, so everybody who's going to be watching this live right now, get ready for a long session because that's how usually things are at the Cārvāka podcast. So I'll give you a brief background about why I'm doing this. If you guys remember, a few months ago, I started with a conversation with actually a good friend of mine, Sachin Nanda. So Sachin actually gave me this idea, and he told me that Kushal, the Hindu experience is actually multiple. So there are different experiences of different Hindus everywhere in the world. So why don't we start talking about the Hindu experiences of Hindus outside India too? And obviously, I started with Sachin, and today I'm extremely happy and excited to, talk to Suhag Shukla from the Hindu American Foundation. So Suhag, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Namaste.
All right, Suhag, let's start with this. Let's start with a brief background about yourself and the Hindu American Foundation. So go for it.
Sure. I'm a second generation Hindu American. My father came to the United States in the mid 60s to pursue his higher education in chemical engineering. And soon after, my mom came and was born and raised in the California area, San Francisco Bay Area. And this was prior to it being kind of the diverse haven that it is today, tech central, where it sometimes feels like Bangalore, Hyderabad, more so than Fremont or Cupertino. And so grew up in a devout Hindu household and didn't really have the institutional infrastructure that today we see in the United States in terms of temples, linguistic groups. These were just emerging because that first generation first had to just get settled. Then it was, okay, now we've settled our home. Now let's settle our community and building those institutions. So I think the first temple that I visited, I may have already been 6 or maybe 7 when I visited a temple. So, there was a lot, it was still just a growing community. And, but still, parents, there were, I think, 2 kind of competing philosophies amongst immigrants then. One was of assimilation and the other one was of, trying to hold on to everything. And my parents, I think, chose the latter. So we learned how to speak, read and write Gujarati. I don't necessarily read or write at a high school level. I'm probably at a kindergarten level, but enough to get around when I'm in Ahmedabad, but fluently speak. So, but there were many of my friends whose parents were not necessarily doing that because they felt that in perhaps passing these things on, language, religion, and other things, that it would just make it that much harder for their kids to assimilate. And they too would have the same struggles that the parents did. So fast forward to the founding of HAF, I've always had a very deep interest in religion. I probably started questioning my parents as a teenager. Why do we do arti? Why do you expect us to marry someone you choose? A lot of conflation between religion and cultural practices that my parents necessarily were not equipped to explain, certainly not to a boisterous and rebellious American teenager. And so back then, Chinmaya Mission had just started, so they enrolled me there. And I was starting to see a distinction between sometimes what I saw as what I thought was religion and what really stemmed from religion or philosophy or whatever name you want to put on it. That then translated to a bachelor's degree in religion. So I studied religion formally in college. And that's when I started coming upon the disconnect between what I saw and understood as religion, not just from my own experiences, but then also my study at Bal Vihar in Chinmaya Mission, and how the Wendy Donegers of the world were presenting Hinduism. And so I think that kind of lit an activist fire in my belly, but not having any outlet and also just being focused on finishing my studies and starting a career, didn't really act too much upon it until law school. And in law school, Hindu student councils were starting to grow across the United States. And I was at the University of Florida, and some students wanted to start a chapter there. So usually those Hindu Student Council chapters were more undergraduate driven. So I agreed to help them as, a lawyer to be, on drafting a constitution and everything. And there we came upon probably my first experience with the internal dynamics, internal community dynamics, with religion. And so we faced opposition right off the bat, not from Christians, not from Muslims on campus, but from some professors and community members who were so-called secular Indians, who said, why do you want to bring religion in, out front? It's something that should be private, and personal. And so they expressed opposition to starting Hindu Student Council. There was a little bit of politics because they saw Hindu Student Council as some sort of project of VHP, which it wasn't. It was Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America, which is a separate organization. So anyways, that was kind of my taste of the internal dynamics that can impede a Hindu identity. So fast forward to a couple years later, my husband and I, and another classmate of mine from law school, Nikhil Joshi, we're starting to also recognize the bias in media. That when we were living in Tampa, there was an article in which the reporter tried to equate some Aghori sect with a missing tourist, and suggesting that maybe the tourist was eaten by the Aghori. So these types of misrepresentations of Hinduism kind of got us activated to start writing letters to the editor and thinking about media bias against Hinduism. At the same time, Mihir Meghani, one of the other co-founders, was also looking for like-minded people to say, hey, we need to create an institution that's going to deal with these things so that future generations of Hindu Americans don't have to face the types of biases that they might, and so that they can be proud of their tradition. And so we started HAF in 2003. So we are now, 16 years old. And we started with the idea that we would professionalize right off the bat. We were looking at other faith-based communities and secular organizations, whether they were advocating for civil rights or human rights or whatever they were doing. They were hiring people who would develop the subject matter expertise, who would be able to cultivate the relationships that are necessary to promote their causes. And therein lies the quick story of HAF.
All right, so let's start with this, because I always like to understand the perspective of different kinds of Hindus, like I said in the start. So that's why my whole interest, when I chat with Sachin, I had a chat with Sachin, was Sachin was a British Hindu, and Sachin identifies very clearly as a British citizen, a British guy, and as a Hindu, both. And I always used to, when Sachin would come to India, or whenever we met outside India too, I would always have this discussion with him. I was like, so what is the distinct difference? Like, where, and there's nothing wrong in being different. Like,
Oh yeah.
like you're born and raised in America. So, I mean, and why I've always been fascinated is obviously because I'm married to a born and raised Canadian.
Yeah.
So, and she's Hindu, but her different, her experience as a Hindu, and I only learned about this when I moved to Canada and I started living there and studying there. And then I married a Canadian and I realized, hang on, our experiences and our worldviews are kind of different. And, we come from different places, different points of view. We look at the world in a slightly different way. And sometimes I feel, and this is my view, and you can correct me if you think it's wrong, I feel somewhere down the line that the unique experience of Hindus born and raised outside India, for that matter, and this is nothing specific to a race per se. I mean, you could be any race. I mean, the first time in my life, I'll give you another example. I came across West Indian Hindus, was in Canada, the Arya Samaj, and boy, those brothers could move. They had their moves.
Yeah.
And I did not know their songs, which is this whole soka chutney genre. And I
Yeah.
was exposed to it in the Arya Samaj, and they were shaking and they were moving. And I was like, damn, these are the coolest Hindus alive. I mean, we suck in India. We don't have their moves. And they had their Bihari calypso, and they would have their Bihari songs and their calypso music. And I was like, damn, this is so cool. These are Hindus, but they're so different from us. They're just in their own unique way different. So, do you think, in your own way, when you have the Hindu American Foundation, do you guys in some way try to absorb the American experience too, along with the Hindu experience?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, so what you touch upon, I always, at some base level, I sometimes feel like an orphan, um, an international orphan, so to speak, because here I always feel like, of course, I'm American, but my Indianness and my Hinduness is very much a part of how people recognize me. If I'm at a coffee shop or whatever, the minute I say, "Oh, my name is Suhag," oh, where are you from? Right? That question is always up front and center. I don't get offended by it. Well, it depends on the context. If someone's like, "Where are you from?" and they're trying to imply some otherness, or, "Oh, thank God you speak English." Yes, that's what American public schools do. They teach you English. But so there's always that reminder that somehow I'm not American, right? By my neighbors or people that see me. But then when I come to India, there's this, "Oh, well, you Americans do it this way." All of a sudden, I'm like, "Wait a minute, but I'm one of you." And there is this sense that, well, no, you're a little bit different, right? Like just little subtle things. I walk into a shop, and if someone's following me around wanting to help me, it makes me really uncomfortable because I'm like, I'm fine, I'll do it on my own. Or even, I'm not accustomed to having help. I vacuum my floors, I wash my dishes, I cook my dinner. That's the American way. I oftentimes wonder why people want to move here if you're doing well in India, because
Yeah.
life in that sense on a day-to-day basis is very different. So there are these constant reminders that it's like neither here, neither there. So that's one thing in terms of just identity and kind of having that reality check, like, okay, wait a minute. So then where do I belong? And that's where the defining of a unique identity is important. And I have found, and this might be the experience of other people from other faith traditions, but I find a great resonance with core Hindu values and core American values, because at a very philosophical and idealistic way, our tradition is a live and let live. It doesn't necessarily play out in your day-to-day lives when your neighbors or your in-laws are all, looking into what you're doing and your every move. But in an ideal sense, there's an innate religious freedom where you are encouraged to seek answers and seek truth and to wade through the different challenges that we face and the different decisions that we face on a daily basis and come to what you believe is right, that upholds certain core principles, like not harming other people, not harming nature, being kind, being compassionate, all these things. And so in that sense, I think we are far more proactive in trying to find those areas of overlap in building our identity so that we have a comfort, a place of comfort where you're not constantly east, west, and trying to find that balance, but can find yourself in the middle and stand tall.
Yeah, another interesting aspect to this is because now you guys are growing as an organization. Now it's more than a decade now, right? A decade and a half, if to be precise. So over the period, the older you get, the bigger you guys will get. The bigger you guys will get, you will have this unique entry into HAF, which will be Hindus who are American citizens now.
Oh, yeah.
But they're born in India, raised in India, probably came here in the tech boom in the 90s.
Yep.
mid 90s, maybe even 2000, 2005. They've been living now. They've pretty much become American. They're 15 years living in America, American passport holders, even have children who are born. So the children are like naturalized American citizens. But here's the thing, they will also enter HAF, right?
Absolutely.
They will bring in that Indian experience. So how are you guys planning to deal with that aspect of it?
So I think we already are in many ways, because immigration is not, it's a constant flow, right? So one generation comes, the next one's already here, the other one hasn't grown, and it's a cycle. So that's there. So what my sensibilities are already different than my parents'. What I have found, though, and I'm going to make some broad sweeping claims. What I have found, say, with the generation that came in the 60s and 70s, is they did not have the comfort of critical mass. They also did not have the power of good that communication brings. So they were very proactive. For those who chose to, they were very proactive in maintaining and preserving the tradition, what they didn't know, exploring the answers and things like that. So, I would come across a lot of people in the community who, for instance, I'll take myself as an example. Sometimes when I come back to India, what I get is, oh, wow, you're so desi. Because the values that my parents left with, the practices and traditions that they left with, they freeze-framed India 1963. So I grew up with 1963 sensibilities, right? Or that's what was taught to me as Indian values. So that's one thing. So you have kind of, and you see this actually if you meet, say, the Gujarati diaspora from Africa, right?
Yes.
They went 100 years ago, 150 years ago.
Absolutely.
And so you meet them, their language, some of the traditions they have carried on are like old school, like old
Totally
school.
relate to this.
Even though I'm old school, they might be old school, right? So you do have that happening. So when you bring newer immigrants, I think in some sense, they are maybe where I am, even though I'm a generation out, if that makes sense. Or if anything, sometimes I find newer immigrants to be even more westernized than I might be. So it's constantly evolving. The other thing that I have remarked, and I do hope that people become more aware of this, is that the first generation, because the critical mass wasn't there, I think there was a quick recognition that, look, if we don't teach this stuff, it's going to disappear. But when you have the comfort of critical mass, see, in India, you don't necessarily have to proactively teach language. You don't have to proactively teach traditions. You just live them. It happens by osmosis. So what I have noted here is that proactive aspect is the awareness of it is not necessarily there. So I have met, distant cousins who will say, oh, how did you learn how to speak Gujarati? I'm like, well, duh, my parents taught me. They're like, oh, wait, but what do you mean they taught you? Because of course you can listen and learn, but they actually sat down and taught me how to read and write, would correct me on the grammar and things like that. But it was a proactive process. I don't know that in India necessarily outside of school that's happening. No. So that awareness that, hey, if we don't teach it, it's going to disappear, isn't happening. Because if you have all Indian friends and you can go to the supermarket and buy any frozen palak paneer or chole or even frozen dosa if you want, you're not going to miss or necessarily have that opportunity to look back and say, okay, these things are valuable. I need to maintain them. I need to preserve them. That awareness, I feel, is diminishing. Now, again, it's a broad sweeping claim. Of course, there are people who recognize that and are going to proactively do that. And they do get enrolled in the Bal Vihars or the temples and things like that. But I do feel that in that sense, the needs will change. I think the Caribbean community, which you're familiar with having lived in California, is a great example that their Hinduism looks and feels different. I love it. I love going to
Awesome.
Trinidadi temples. I mean, I think when the first prime minister of Hindu descent was elected, you had a crowd of thousands erupt into Hanuman Chalisa. I think that is, I get goosebumps even just thinking and talking about that. That they preserved things. I fear for Hinduism here in the United States. There have been a lot of challenges that we can talk about, but that have kind of made it difficult to preserve the tradition one or two generations out that other diasporas have succeeded in.
Yeah, you know what my observation was, again, see, obviously at the end of the day, these are not data driven experiences. These are anecdotal experiences that you have. I mean, obviously, in my case, North America is like my second home, because wife's a Canadian, brother lives in America now. I have a lot of family there, so
Sure.
I pretty much go there all the time, drive across the states, and so I'm well versed with the American lifestyle.
Mhm.
Plus, I used to live there, so for me, it's like a very normal thing. When I talk to an American, I can actually get them. I think I get them more than the British Hindu any day.
Sure.
I get the American Hindu experience and the Canadian Hindu experience, and I can only draw a parallel between those two. But what I found in my stay or my visits over there was, it depends on which community also you belong to. I think with the Gujaratis and the South Indian Hindus, I think they are far more rooted to the culture.
I do hear that. I do hear that.
Because the Punjabis are just useless.
Well,
I'm just joking. Obviously, don't take me seriously. No, everybody was like, you called Punjabis useless. Well, I'm a Punjabi. I'm allowed. So that's the thing. What I found was, the temples have played a great role in the Hindu experience outside India. The temples, in a way, in fact, what I realized was the temples in India, since India has now become independent, the temple just became a temple where you go, you do the ghanta, and you say, hey God, what's up? And you do your puja, and you put 10 rupees or 5 rupees or 20 or 100, depending on your shraddha, in the dan peti.
Yep.
And you come out.
Yep.
That the temple has become that in India now. That's what I've experienced.
Yeah.
But in America, when I went there, even the gurdwaras, not just the temples, even the gurdwaras or the Jain derasars or anything over there in Canada and America, I realized it was a lot more than just a place of worship. It was a community gathering. People would have functions, they would have parties, and everything was slightly different. Even let's say, for example, even if you have a wedding in America, in Canada, the first time in my life I experienced there is an MC conducting the thing. Like, what's happening? You know how the reception in America is very different. You know what I'm talking about, right? There's an MC.
Bridesmaids.
Yeah. So, but in India, the reception is like, the bride and the groom are standing and everybody keeps coming on the stage, and then you start, okay, peri penna, page lagato,
Yep.
or Gujarati, and you just keep on doing that, and it's like, oh, my back is paining. When will this torture stop? At least, Punjabis hate each other, so we can only invite 250 people to a wedding. But with you Gujaratis, you invite the whole bloody village in India. It's like 2,000 people in the wedding. So imagine, my best friend was a Kachhi, so the whole village was at the wedding. After a while, he was like, yaar, main kitne logon ke pair chhu? I can't do this anymore. But he had to do it. But what I experienced, obviously it's community driven too. In America, certain communities are far more rooted. But having said that, the temple has played its role. But where I experienced a big lacuna in the North American, I won't say the American, just the North American Hindu experience was, and this is where I was telling you offline. So I moved to Canada in 2000. I was there for 2 years at a stretch, doing my little bit, getting my education sorted out, and I'm an avid reader, so I went to the library. When I went to the library, I was like, let me find out what these people think about India and Hindus. See, I was not concerned about their views about Islam. I could care less. But I was like, what do these people think? Because every time I would meet someone over there, they would ask me stupid questions. I don't know if they ask these stupid questions today, but I was asked a lot of weird questions, like, do you have this kind of a car? Do you have that?
Oh, yeah.
And this is like, they were discussing about the Atari video game. And I was like, yeah, we used to have this boxing game. And they looked at me as if, oh, brown guy, why do you have this experience of Atari. I was like, what do you mean I do have? I mean, I played Atari in India.
Right.
I was like, what are you talking about? And it was very confusing to me. So I went to the library. I was like, what do these guys read about us? And what I came across was, I think, is a caste, cow, and curry. That's all they know about. And it was literally, I was like, oh my God, they actually think this.
Mm-hmm.
And this is their experience about all of us. It's like, that's encouraging. That's a good start. Okay, they literally think like this about us. So where and this is my critique of the temples, because the temples didn't sort this out. To be very honest, the temples
Mm-hmm.
were like, you come here, you play God, you play your garba, and you do your thing, and maybe we'll do some, we'll teach Gujarati or Punjabi or Hindi classes, and
Sure.
it pretty much ended there. But where I found a serious problem in my experience, and I mean, my brother-in-law, the guy learned Sanskrit himself because he could not have find any resources. So, but he was a driven guy. That's the aberration, not the norm. My
Right.
brother-in-law is the aberration. He's a registered pandit. He conducts weddings in America and Canada both, so he can do the whole shebang. But the point is, there was no intellectual go-to place.
Yeah.
There was no platform where, if I wanted to go and say, if I wanted to get a Hinduism 1.1, right,
Mm-hmm.
101 kind of a thing. So do you think my analysis is correct, and what is HAF doing to fix this?
So yes and no. I agree with you that temples are vibrant centers for the community here, that they can anchor people on Hinduness, right? Because you have people from South India, you have people from East, West, you have from every direction. So it transcends language, which is a good thing, I think. There's also kind of a sharing of different traditions. So you get to learn in a way that you may not necessarily if you stayed in India and you stayed in one town and you don't travel. So you will see black granite murtis next to white marble murtis. This tends to be a big thing when temples are being built. What stone will the murti be? Because in northern parts you see more white marble murtis, while in South India you're going to see more black granite. So these are the kind of subtle things that go, in some sense, a temple shows you where the community has come together and been able to compromise and build something together. Second, the temple took on multiple roles, as you mentioned, right? One is to serve as a place to socialize, to celebrate holidays and things like that, because you're living in primarily non-Hindu, non-Indian neighborhoods. The third is the preservation and passing on of religion. So having bal vihars, you don't see that at temples in India. So I would venture to guess, I haven't, this is all anecdotal, but I have yet to be in a temple where they don't have a bal vihar. So their focus, in some sense, is serving the community. It's not necessarily bridging the gap between the community and mainstream. And so part of the evolution of a community, part of the growth, so take that as, say, this is the Hindu American community in its adolescence, growing up into an adult, building these institutions, right? Now we're an adult. Now we have to actually navigate the world and start engaging with other people. And that's kind of the opportunity that HAF sees, in terms of, okay, we have these amazing, robust centers of tradition and teaching. So they are doing their job of instilling the values and the culture into the next generation. How do we now create a mainstream culture that's accepting of that? So I don't necessarily fault the temples for doing that. The second thing is that, a temple, that's one big phenomenon that you don't see necessarily in all temples in India, is an education arm to actually understand, not just the pujaris understanding what's being done, but the general people. Why are we here? What do we believe? Or what do we accept? What's our worldview on things? Having to kind of tackle that, because you have a constant reminder of what you're not, which is you're not a Judeo-Christian American, right? So it forces you to learn and study. So that phenomenon, I think, is a blessing once you leave India, because it does spark something. Well, wait a minute. If someone's asking me, I want to be able to answer because they're questioning me about who I am. So in that sense, I think temples have done a tremendous job. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely. I think that if you look at the way, say, synagogues serve their community needs, in terms of, say, someone's in trouble, the synagogue is going to kind of come around. Here, it might still be your friend circle. There's a little bit of that, what are people going to say? And you don't necessarily share when you're in trouble. Those are all kind of cultural things that still follow us here. But I think that's where HAF saw the opportunity, is that how do we bridge that gap? How do we ensure that mainstream America understands us? And that has to be both a proactive and reactive approach, right? Reactive in writing letters to the editor, participating in school textbook reform, and fighting or pushing back against this cash cow curry narrative. But the proactive side of that is also creating content, going out to educators who don't necessarily want their students to learn wrong things about people, their neighbors who are Hindu, or about India, giving them the types of materials and resources that will empower them. Same thing with reporters. The average reporter wants to get it right. So, meet them. And that is something that I think where especially our American sensibilities are a huge asset, right? I talk the talk, I walk the walk. I'm American. So I'm able to communicate in a way that, if there's room for misunderstanding, I can quickly address it. So I think that, yes, temples have really fulfilled that role, but to expect them to then take that next step, I think they'll get there. But I think that that's an unfair expectation because they have such a huge job on their hands.
Well, fair enough. But here's my thing. Look, what happens is that I know Chinmay Mission is there in North America, America, Canada. They have their center, so they do the Gita lessons, stuff like that. I know, people have not realized the RSS in India is also very different from the global RSS. It is so different. They have their own thing. They don't even listen to the local Indian RSS. They just have their own thing. They do it in their own ways. Like, I mean, my experience when I met Ramji, for example, I was like, wow. India mein kyun nahi rakhte? I mean, that was my first answer. Why isn't this guy in India?
Right.
He was that impressive. I mean, Ramji was so impressive. So my experience over there was too the same. And here's the thing: when you're stuck to a sampradaya, what happens is that's not how they roll in the West. In the West, there might be any evangelical way or a Protestant way or a Catholic way or a Presbyterian way or a Lutheran way. Or there may be a Jehovah's Witness way. But beyond that, there is that Nicene Creed. These are the standard principles that we believe in. These are what Christians believe in. I saw that lacking in a lot of Hindus, not born and raised in India. Let me be very clear. They go, even if they are as materialistic and as careless as they want, they're forced to do something by their parents. I mean, it's just India. It's just at your face all the time. Yeah. You can't avoid it. Even if you wanted to, it's like, why are you doing this? Please, beta, do puja. It's like that. You're forced to. But when I used to interact, because I don't know why it happened like that. Like, I hardly had any friends who were born and raised in India when I used to live there. Like, or even my best friend in Canada, he's a born and raised Canadian. He's a proper, and his parents are from Africa, so I can totally relate to the Gujaratis in Africa angle, because his parents were very different from Gujaratis in India. The typical Gujaratis. They were different. Even their accent was different. The Gujarati boli was very different.
Yes,
they had the subtle words which they would use. With I was like, hang on, I'm from Mumbai. I actually understand Gujarati 100% because I'm from Mumbai. Right. It's just normal. I mean, I was born in mini Gujarat in Mumbai. There's a place called Ghatkopar, which is like full of Gujaratis. So my Gujarati is pretty good. So I was like, I don't get what they're saying.
It's like a hybrid of Kathiawadi, plus some like Swahili words sometimes thrown in there.
Yes. Yeah. So I was confused. But do you think you guys have been able to crack this where, let's say, it doesn't matter what kind of a Hindu you are, especially now, the Hindus who've migrated to America from India, they're going to have kids who are born and raised there. So don't you think it's very important for the average Hindu, irrespective of whether you're a South Indian Hindu, North Indian Hindu, or a Northeastern Hindu, you get a 101 standard template like every other religion in America has, where if somebody goes to you and says, hang on, man, what kind of Hindu are you? And I have learned this. People ask us this question over there. I don't know if you've experienced this. And I would be like, what do you mean? What kind of Hindu are you? They're like, no, your people only do this with us. They're like, I'm not that Hindu. I'm this Hindu.
Right.
And then, so do you think we need a standard answer of this all of us agree on? Do you think we need that?
I think it's important because it exists. I think it's important that I think we talked about this earlier, that the way that if I'm in an interfaith setting, what I say is Hinduism is like a beautiful necklace. There's a thread that joins us all together. And maybe you want to define that thread as, an understanding of dharma. Or you may interpret dharma differently, but at least there's this acknowledgement of dharma, an acknowledgement of an underlying unity, right? Whatever you want to define that thread with. But then each person is a pearl, you have a gold bead, you have a silver bead, maybe you have a diamond, all different shapes and sizes, but we are linked together. Maybe you want to call that our ethos, whatever it is. So I think it's important to know what that ethos is on multiple levels. One, because it exists, because I can, as a Gujarati and as someone who came from a Pushti Marg background from my parents and now could, study Advaita Vedanta, that I can walk into any temple and have a sense of comfort there. So there is that underlying unity, shared values, whatever you want to call it, that's there, and we should be able to define it. So early on, what we saw were these kind of pan-Hindu temples in the United States. What I've started seeing in the past decade are a little bit more of reflecting what we see in India, where you have, this is just the Balaji temple. This is just the Swaminarayan temple. This is the Vaishnav Pushti Marg temple. And so we're moving away from the pan-Hindu temple, where those opportunities are there, to kind of be going back to a very delineated Sampradayic, formula, which that's also there. It's also reality. But I don't want to see one replace the other. I think that the pan-Hindu is important because that's where we're constantly reminded, right? I have been to some Sampradaya lectures where they'll say, well, we do this and they do that. It didn't take me a few minutes until I realized that the they were talking about was me, because I was not part of that Sampradaya. So, that's going to happen. And, when you are trying to maintain the tradition, I understand the value of that. But on top of just the historical reality of these shared values, especially here as a religious minority, it's important that we know where we have shared values to be able to come together and set aside these minor differences, like between, well, maybe some people may not see them minor, but whether you believe in this particular swarup or this one or whatever it is that defines the particular sampradaya, we need to be able to set that aside. And I haven't seen those types of differences coming up. If anything, it's more tactical, where, say we have a sign-on letter where something has happened in the media, the CNN Believer, for instance, right? When Reza Aslan had come out with that program. So we were able to solicit the support of pretty much every sampradaya, every linguistic group, every community that you can imagine that identifies as Hindu, or even as a sub-identity. So I think there are opportunities there, but that's why we have to kind of keep that understanding in the background at all times, that we're Hindu. Then you can be a Swaminarayan Hindu if you want. You can be a Hare Krishna Hindu if you want. You can be whatever, a Cārvāka Hindu if you want, that all doesn't matter. We got to keep that at the center.
All right. So somebody in the super chat had asked that if you're an NRI, basically his question was, if you're an NRI moving into America, how would you manage to teach your kids Hinduism? So I think you've pretty much taken care. But do you want to add something to that? Let's say somebody from India moves into America and they want their children to learn Hinduism in America. So how do you think HAF could help them? Those specific cases.
Okay. So first, if you move into a community that has a robust temple, then certainly take your children there because they're going to learn some version of Hinduism. But more importantly, they're going to have a community where they have at least a weekly reminder that they're not the only ones that see the world in a particular way or might have these certain practices that make them different from their everyday classmates. So having that comfort, especially because kids are so susceptible to peer pressure, if they know that they have friends who they can relate to at least once or twice a week, that's always valuable. I do also think it's so important as parents to be proactive in your children's education. We have made it a point to read the Gita and read different stories with our kids because they're not just stories. They have life lessons that are ever relevant. So, we can read the Gita and tie it back to the importance of studying for a test that my son might have, right? And you're able to then see what kind of questions are coming up for them and deepens your own knowledge. Some of the questions that my kids have asked have made me have to go back and, learn some more. So I think it's really important as parents to be proactive. Traditions and philosophy are a lifelong learning process. It's not like you're going to get some degree at the end of it and you're going to be the expert of because it's also not just a matter of taking in knowledge, but then processing it and it then becoming a part of your very being in the way that you're treating other people, the way you are handling your stresses in life. So I think that is equally, if not more important, is as parents, start learning yourself so that you can teach your kids.
All right. I think this is a very important aspect which I wanted to talk to you about. This is slightly political and social both. So look, there is a new reality that I think is dawning upon the average Hindu. I don't know how many of them are realizing that, but at least I sitting here and I tend to follow American politics a lot more than I don't know how many Indians follow it, but I tend to follow it very seriously, both American and Canadian politics. I don't know why, but Canadian politics is boring as hell. But thanks to Trump, American politics is a entertainment gala, basically.
It's a Twitter feed.
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, the dude wants to buy Greenland. Who does that? I mean, he's so entertaining. I love him. He's so entertaining. So here's my thing now. My experience, and as someone sitting on the outside looking at American politics, is there is obviously I'm not talking about the average American, that is the moderate, central, middle American, who sometimes votes Republican, sometimes votes Democrat. I'm talking about the ideologues on both sides. The base, as they call it in America, the base of the Democrats and the base of the Republicans. The Hindus are in a weird situation.
Absolutely.
The base of the Democrats is never going to let the Hindu qualify in their oppression Olympiad or oppression Olympics because they bring in the caste angle. To be very honest, they say, "Oh, you guys are privileged Indians," because let's face the facts: most Indians who have migrated, Hindus, are usually falling in those upper castes. Let's just face the facts. The facts are there. So you don't qualify in the base of the Democrats in the oppression Olympiad there. With the base of the Republican Party, you're a pagan anyways, you're going to hell.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying this is that means that I don't want to create an image that, oh, Hindus are under trouble. No, America is an amazing country. I have family there. Canada is amazing. It's not so much in Canada, but it is definitely there in America because the Canadian right wing is actually pretty centrist. In comparison to the Republican Party in that sense. But if you have a situation like that, and I know the Hindu American Foundation is involved in a lot of even if I don't use the word political, but it's connected to politics,
Oh,
right? Like you guys
absolutely.
were
We're in that
so,
space.
yeah, so you guys are in that space.
Mhm.
So when whether it was fighting for the California textbook row, and I don't want to visit that here because you have already explained it in detail in Sham's show, but
Mhm.
that's why I wanted to bring in this angle because you guys did not
Yeah,
touch upon it on
sure.
Sham's show. So let's try to bring about this. So how do you guys plan to tackle this unique problem where the base of the Democrats and the base of the Republicans actually doesn't give a damn about us as Hindus?
It's an everyday reality. And so there are certain regulations in the United States for what's called a nonprofit, right? So an NGO in Indian parlance. So we have certain privileges like being tax exempt, so our supporters get a deduction and all that sort of stuff. So, but in order to be a 501c3 NGO, you cannot directly engage in politics. But the other thing is, so we don't necessarily directly engage in politics, but we have political stances on a variety of issues because whatever issue is affecting not just the well-being of Hindus, but look, if Hindus are being affected, more likely than not, there's other people who are being adversely affected. And also, I think because we come from a tradition that sees our duty and our interdependence with nature, anything that affects the well-being of the planet, we're also going to be involved in. And therein lies kind of how we enter politics, because it's policies that shape the well-being of those two things. Certainly society does as well, but the government has a role. We have said from the get-go that we're nonpartisan. That was a deliberate decision from the beginning when we started HAF, but experience has taught us that there's no other way to be if you are going to approach these issues from a Hindu lens. So while our tradition, I feel inherently is progressive, and I use progressive not in a political sense, but in a
Got it.
sense of freedom giving, right? So our philosophical stances, I'm not talking about social realities, our philosophical stances towards gender, towards individual freedom, towards choice in trying to understand the world around us. Those are inherently what people would say are freedom giving, right? So, in that sense, you would think that there's a natural affinity to go to the left. But when it comes to the issues that we advocate for, let's take civil rights in the United States. We're going to get more buy-in from the left side of the spectrum than sometimes the right. But when we're talking about human rights in some circumstances, especially say if we're talking about countering violent extremism or countering terrorism, we're going to get more buy-in from the right. Complicating this, so in some sense, if we're getting slapped by both the left and the right for any stance that we've taken, I feel like we're doing our job right because we're here to tick people off, or we're going to end up ticking people off because we're not necessarily ideological. We are approaching the issues in a way to see what's the most constructive solution. And that may not necessarily fit into the ideology of either one. On the right, you have a strong evangelical presence. And so when it comes to the issues like proselytizing or converting on the basis or on the condition of humanitarian aid, something that we have stood out against and been very vocal about. So, for instance, when Compassion International lost its FCRA status in India,
Yes.
we submitted formal testimony to the U.S. government to say, wait a minute, this is not an issue of religious freedom. This is an issue of like tax evasion and not following the laws of India. If we as Americans are going to expect foreign organizations or American organizations to abide by our laws, we should respect that another democracy have the same right, right? So there we raised the ire of many, right offices. But then if we take issues on like human rights, and very often our human rights portfolio, where Hindu and other minorities are suffering, tend to be Islamic republics.
Pakistan.
So, Right, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Bhutan was one, which is, different from the other countries that we cover. But there is a sense on the left that, you know, we we are not in a position right now because of domestic situation with Islamophobia to be able to criticize things that might be happening elsewhere. So we don't necessarily solicit support from the left. Complicating all of this is the strong presence of what I call South Asianists on the left in those progressive circles. So we are not just coming in with what you touched upon, potentially caste privilege, but we are also kind of the hegemonic Indian, because South Asia is made up of all these countries, but India is the domineering giant there. And we're Hindu. Hindus are the domineering giant, mean majority. So you kind of have three strikes, you're out. Add to that, economic and educational success, and you're like way up on the check marks of how much privilege you have to check at the door. So these are kind of the trends that have resulted in our getting, ironically, bullied out of a anti-bullying summit. So there was, for instance, a group of South Asian faith-based and secular groups that were coming together to talk about bullying. Now, we came out with a report a couple of years ago on the relationship between misinformation being taught about Hinduism in India in school textbooks and a correlation with increasing bullying of young Hindu American children in public schools. So it's, we had the credentials to be there. We have advocated on this issue, but because of whatever politics are occurring in India, there was you're Hindu. Oh, wait, you're Hindu nationalists. We can't have you at this. So at the last minute, we were disinvited. This happens routinely. So that is a challenge because it ignores, one, the fact that you can label someone a Hindu nationalist and it's just a pejorative period without necessarily having to be forced to define what that means. But second, we're a minority in this country. We have the same challenges as young Sikh children, as young Muslim children. So where there would have been an opportunity to set aside old world baggage, if you want, or to actually just look at what are the shared challenges that we have. If I can work and this is not to mean that we're not able to work across differences. We've worked with evangelical organizations, we've worked with Muslim organizations, where there is a commitment to constructive change. But if your commitment is to outrage, that's where we see especially that Hindus are being boxed out and Indians are being boxed out.
All right, before I actually ask you a follow-up, somebody on the super chat has made the most interesting comment where they want to know where can they buy the painting in the background that you have.
I fell in love with this painting. It's an artist named Chandni Mishra. She lives in Delhi. We started a project called the Shakti Initiative, and it is an effort to highlight the role of goddess and the feminine divine in the Hindu tradition. So I was looking for an emblem for that project, and I came across it. There's only one. It's an original. I'm sorry,
All
but
right.
you can enjoy it on our website.
Yeah, so cool. So now this is why I asked you this question about the left and the right. Personally, again, by following American politics, I think there is only one ideology in the West politically that, and this is my view again, that comfortably sits with the Hindu mindset. The Hindu mindset, which is decentralized, bottom up, plural. Yeah, we have our quirks, we have our problems, but I'm talking about at an intellectual level. And the only place where I found myself comfortable with were the libertarians.
I knew you were going to say that.
Those were the only people I would find comfort with.
Yeah.
Because they believed in what I called was the dharmic way. You leave me alone. Yes, national security, be a hawk. Fine, borders are important. But we are pro-immigration, which most Hindus are, by the way.
Yeah.
Even in India, people don't realize Hindus in India, by and large, are pro-immigration. The Rohingyas is a separate issue because that's something that the Indians in India are opposing, because that's a planned move to change the demography of Jammu. I mean, there are Bangladeshis in India, for goodness sakes. We all know how many Bangladeshis live in India. I mean, just go to Navi Mumbai and all your maids are Bangladeshis. It's just an open reality. Nobody even denies that. So it's like that. So where I would find the most comfort intellectually was always with the libertarians. Yes, I know they are weird in America. Yes, they had a naked man going around in their conference or whatever that was. You leave all that drama aside, but I always felt, and this is again my criticism, because I have no clue why 85% of the Hindus vote Democrat in America. I have no clue why they do that. Like, at least whatever data I've been able to gather, 80 plus percentile of people vote Democrat in America. I'm not judging them, but I vote. Not that I will vote Republican. I won't vote Republican either.
Right.
I would always vote Libertarian. And so I'm just trying to throw this idea to you guys. Why do you think the Hindus have never looked at the Libertarians? Are they that useless?
Oh, no, I agree. So I've taken a couple of political tests, like on slate.com and others. Around election is when they pop up. And I do pop up as a liberal libertarian. But, I'm a lifelong, this is not a reflection on HAF's politics, but I'm a lifelong registered Democrat because right now, if I were to take my values, which, as you rightly pointed, probably fits squarely within libertarian, I'm going to find more policies being promoted that at least touch upon the solutions that would come from a libertarian perspective on that side. And we can't ignore the fact that we are a two-party system, even though it's not formal. That's the way the system is set up. But that's also where, like, candidates like Tulsi Gabbard, are getting attention because she is not, in that sense, you can't just fit her into a peg, right? So she is taking on a lot of those issues. Now, are there people who might be taking on a libertarian view and approaching policy on the Republican side? Probably, right? That's the beauty in that sense, that right now they could be on either way. But as long as we're a two-party system, I think most people, especially as close as our elections have been in this country in the past couple cycles, I don't think people are ready to throw a vote away, is what maybe it's going to come across, right? Because the two major parties they take up so much of the space. They control access to information. So that, the debate stage, for instance, the goalpost is constantly moving with the Democrats. I've lost count as to how many are running for president. But, one day it's, oh, you need this many individual donors. Next day it's like, oh, you need this many percentage in this many polls. Oh, wait, but they have to be this poll. So the goalpost is always shifting, but they still control the space. If you're a libertarian, you're never going to get to the national stage where people can actually hear you on ABC or CNN or whatever. And that's a problem, I think, in the long term for a democracy. I think that you have to have a more even playing field to let different perspectives come forward.
Fair enough. Yeah, and this has been the answer I've always gotten from the Americans over there, that they say, we'll waste our vote over there. Right. Obviously, but I have realized a change in voting patterns of Hindus, at least at the congressman level, which changes every 2 years, I think, right? That's what happens in America. The congressman changes every 2 years, or who changes? Yeah. Congressman change.
Right.
And there I have seen, I forgot the name of the congressman, but it was very interesting. There was a Desi guy standing, and the area was 30% Desis.
Oh, are you talking about Ro Khanna and Vanilla Singh?
I think I don't remember.
Where two Indians were running against each other?
No, not the two Indians one. The other side was a white guy, and the white guy won because the white guy was so smart. He ticked all the boxes. The Indian was going all progressive, squad. I am for the squad, and the Indians were like, "You're for the squad? Okay, we go with the white guy." And he lost.
Shame on that guy. I keep forgetting that guy's name.
Okay, you'll
I mean,
have to remind me.
yeah, I was like, what the hell? How can you lose?
Right.
I mean, I thought the Desis would have voted for you. No, he lost.
Well,
So
but that's the thing, though, that you are seeing. So, first of all, there have been Indian Republicans for a very long time. And even before that Republican Hindu coalition or whatever that organization is that had the big Trump rally, the Bollywood style rally, even before that, there's the Indian Republican Council, I think IRC, I'm forgetting the official name, but they've been in existence. The first Indian American to reach the level of chief of staff, which is a high position in a congressman's office, was an Indian American in a Republican's office. So, but again, they're not as prevalent, but I think we're seeing a shift that's good for our community because no one party is going to meet all of our needs. That's one thing. And there is a lot of zigzag voting because, again, if you approach these issues from Hindu sensibilities, no one party is going to completely align with what we see as a solution. So I think there's probably a lot more zigzag voting going on, even though people might be registered in a particular way.
All right. So someone has again, Ramesh Suresh has made a request to you. Can you reach out to guys like Dave Rubin and Joe Rogan for a platform to explain our religion better to the Yanks? Plus, I think Sadhguru can be used as an ambassador to provide the dharmic perspective in USA. This is actually a standard line. And I think this is where the Hindu struggle lies, to be very honest. And this is where you guys have to play a stellar role, I guess, in the American life. That I feel kind of bad at times. I was like, I hate, playing victim because this is something very un-Hindu. Actually, we're not taught to play. We're not very whiny kind of people. I mean,
Right.
we just get on with our business. We are very to the point people. I think Hindus are probably one of the best immigrants anywhere in the world. And I say this with a lot of pride that wherever I have seen Hindus migrate.
Mm-hmm.
Indians in general migrate, not just Hindus. We are model immigrants. We merge with that society's fabric. I mean, it was so nice to see the other day on 15th August where people were, celebrating 15th August in America, but they made it a point. They had the American flag and the Indian flag.
Oh, yeah.
In Canada, they had the Canadian flag and the Indian flag. Now that to me shows a community that has tried to blend in to their, I mean, a lot of times you say, you have the Matrubhumi, Karmabhumi concept,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So for a lot of Indians who maybe have migrated to America, that's not their Matrubhumi. It is their Karmabhumi. In your case, it's a Matrubhumi, Karmabhumi, both. But in a lot of Indians, it's a Matrubhumi. Yeah. So that's Dharmabhumi. Yeah, for you guys. Yeah. So, but it matters a lot. And for such model immigrants, I mean, yeah, you'll have the odd idiot Hindu or the odd idiot Indian in general, but by and large, we're good immigrants. We blend in with the culture. And in fact, we try to, prove to the American that, oh, you shut up. I am more American than you Americans are. That kind of a thing. We try to overdo it sometimes.
Right.
So do you think it's somewhere down the line, do you think it actually pains the average Hindu living in America that, yaar, itna karne ke baad bhi hum gali khate hain? Do you think that?
So that was a lot. So I think that there's a knowledge gap for a lot of people, right? That our culture, someone described Indian culture as a high context culture. We have so many little subtleties. It can be a tilt of a head or, just little things that make it so daunting to explain to people, right? So one of the things that we started was our Dharma Ambassadors program for this very reason. How do you package 5,000 years plus of history and a whole spectrum of diversity, internal diversity, and explain it to people, right? We've never, until you leave India, you don't have to explain yourself to anyone. And so that's a thing that anyone who leaves India will be faced with. So this Dharma Ambassadors program of ours is to help people learn the language. Because we assimilate, but everyone is good at what they have learned to be good at, right? So we have awesome engineers, awesome doctors, But this liberal arts side of things, we have not invested in as a people.
Yes.
Right? At least from a Hindu perspective. We have certainly a lot of investment from a Marxist perspective. And
only from the Marxist
only
perspective.
from the Marxist perspective, which is what we're now paying for, right? An average, everyday, moderate, mainstream Hindu is paying the price today because of our lack of investment in exploring these things, to enter these fields and be able to have both not just a predominant narrative that reflects how we see the world, how we understand it, or at least the diversity of it, but then also learning from them and then having the language to be able to explain ourselves to others. So I don't know if that answers your question, but at least the Dharma Ambassadors program was to meet that need, that people know the tradition, but when it comes to having to explain it, it's like, sometimes I ask my mom, like, oh, well, how did you make this? She doesn't have a recipe. Like, she just mixes 4 different kinds of atta together.
Yeah.
You know, she makes her handwo. I'll just use handwo as an example. Like, she doesn't necessarily know how to give me a recipe for it. It's not in her nature to take a cup and, you know, measure it properly and make those things. So we have recognized that sometimes you need a recipe and you need those instructions in order to relay to other people.
Like a manual.
You are. Yeah, exactly. A manual. Actually, going back to that question about what someone can do if they're moving here, we also on our website have that Hinduism 101. That's at least a starting place. It's intended for non-Hindu audiences, but sometimes I think as an average Hindu, we might know micro-Hinduism, which is important. It's how Hinduism looks for you in your everyday life. What the 101 program attempts to do is give you a macro view of Hinduism, like, okay,
It's needed.
right? Like, we're here in a helicopter, couple feet above the ground, and this is where we see Hinduism. What's it look like from an airplane? Because when you're engaging with non-Hindus, we need to start with that airplane view. Then they can better understand the helicopter view.
Yep. So there's another super chat, and this again is a good question. So Poonam Abi has asked, Suhag, do you interact and communicate with Arya Samaj of USA and other such organizations? Won't that coming together make things easier for you all?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're a professionalized model, as I had mentioned before. So we have a physical office in Washington, D.C. I think right now I can safely and accurately say it is the only Hindu organization with professional staff based in Washington, D.C. So we are able to cultivate relationships with the media, government, et cetera. We also have 12 full-time staff. That doesn't happen with zero support. That happens because the community invests in us. And so we have individual donors from Arya Samaj, from Chinmaya Mission, from your everyday pan-Hindu temples, from I think I said Arya Samaj already, Swaminarayan, I mean, every organization imaginable. And when it comes time to those issues that we're dealing with that require a congressman or a media house to understand that, look, you've screwed up or you need to do something in a certain way, we galvanize the community. We reach out to all these organizations. So we're doing our best. We could do better in cultivating relationships with organizational leadership so that to say, hey, can you lend your organizational name to this? Or another way that we engage with organizations is, we have built really good relationships with some members of the media, especially those that cover the religion beat in the United States. So if they call us and say, hey, I'm looking to do a story in New Jersey, and it's September, is there anything going on? Well, during September, it might be that particular day where we know that Gayatri Havan is going to happen. Well, then we can connect that organization and say, with Arya Samaj, and say, okay, why don't you go and meet with them? Or whatever the case may be. It might be Navratri at another location. But we do have, in that sense, a working relationship with a variety of organizations.
All right, cool. So now I have to ask this question. You cannot come on the Cārvāka podcast and not discuss about Cārvāks.
Uh-oh.
So
now we're wading into areas of ignorance, just to warn.
Yeah, so this is my question. as a Cārvāka, living Cārvāka, and this has been. I'm sorry. This is, I think, my criticism of the general Hindu movement,
Mhm.
which includes the Hindu American Foundation, and this is constructive criticism. I'm so sorry. In the whole app, and this has been in India, outside India, by the way. I think Hindus don't realize the speed and the rate at which, because I have no other option, I have to use the word atheism, is rising
Mhm.
amongst Hindu kids itself. Now, most Hindu kids know this much, that Hinduism does not have a problem with atheism. So when the census happens in India, a lot of kids, you'll be surprised, like the no religion category in India, even in the last census, is hardly anything. It has increased, but it's not increased as if, oh wow, it's exploded. It's every time the census person comes to your house, they say, I'm Hindu. Because the distinction was never made between atheism and Hinduism.
Mhm.
Having said that, still, I still feel that the overall or the overarching narrative when it comes to explaining and presenting Hinduism to the audiences, especially because people don't realize in the age of the internet, neo atheism post 9/11 has risen like
Mhm.
crazy in the West, across the world. Neo atheism is rising, and they are going to attack Hinduism, whether they like it or not. Now, I am literally the sole voice in this entire space which addresses that. And I go and talk to different people. I try and explain to them what Charvak Darshan is, where do we come from? We, as in Charvaks, come from, and why are we still calling ourselves Hindu
Mhm.
in spite of all of this? Now, where do you think HF can actually try and bridge the gap? Because trust me, if you live in America, you cannot ignore the reality that Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, or Peter Boghossian, I can just go on naming one after the other. I read them. The point is, a lot of other kids watch them, hear them.
Mhm.
Now, in fact, more than the Hindus in India, I feel this could be a worry for Hindus outside India, because they are in the neo-atheistic template far more than the Hindus in India are in that neo-atheistic template. Do you think HUF has any plan to address this? And I had to ask this question because you're on my podcast, so you have to answer this. Otherwise, what's the point of coming on the Cārvāka podcast if you don't address the Cārvāka question?
Right,
So
right.
do you think the HAF has any plan? Do you guys have any plans of? Because I personally know so many agnostic, atheistic kids who found me on the internet after I started my channel, and they have been like, "Huh? Now we know we can call ourselves Hindu. You are the answer." No, I'm not good enough. I'm just a guy living in India. I'm not even there in America.
Right, right.
So, what do you think HF has? Do you guys have any plans for that particular segment of Hindus?
Well, so first of all, even my just finding you was partially that, right? That someone pointed out that, hey, do you acknowledge atheism in Hinduism? And so I came across you. I think I might have heard you on Brown Pundits or something, and that's where, you know, I got the ball rolling in. Hey, this is an area that we're not necessarily familiar with because the texts that were in existence are no longer in existence, right? At least that's my understanding from what I have researched and studied on this topic. I think you're right that atheism is going to be on the rise. It is on the rise. I very often listen to Sam Harris and his podcast, but the one thing you'll notice is that his angst towards organized religion, one is organized, which we're the opposite of, but the second is that it's definitely a pushing back against Abrahamic traditions. And so when it comes to Eastern, I would venture to guess that maybe Sam Harris is a practicing Buddhist / atheist, or however you want to like qualify him in terms of, meditation and things like that. So I think that that's one thing, that when people, especially Hindus, are talking about atheism, they have internalized a very Abrahamic understanding of religion, which I don't believe that Hindu Dharma fits within. So that's one thing. Second is talking about that knowledge gap, that a lot of folks, and I ran into people in college too, who said, well, I'm not Hindu, I'm atheist. And they were basing their understanding of Hinduism only on what they saw, and not necessarily what they studied. So you see your mom or your dad impose something on you, whether it's whether you're allowed to date or whatever. And you are going to only translate that without anyone telling you that that's Hinduism, right? And that has nothing to do with Hinduism. That's a cultural, social decision that a family is going to make. So not having a clear understanding of what the philosophy is and what the philosophy teaches, and maybe just seeing one version of someone's application of the philosophy, right? Like say someone says, okay, no dating, and that is rooted in brahmacharya or something like that. Our tradition still encourages us to reinterpret these things by time and context. So when you mistake or assume, make the presumption that what you have seen on a day-to-day life is religion, it's very easy to say, well, I don't want that. It's impinging on who I want to be. So there's another aspect to, I think, a rise in atheism, because if you start reading if you read the Gita or you read anything, you don't necessarily have to have a belief in God. How are we defining atheism too, right? Is it just the disbelief in a higher being or higher power, or are we talking about an underlying energetic field that binds all of existence? Is that going to be pulled into that definition of God, right? So from a Hindu perspective, how are you going to define that? So all these things, I think, complicate the matter and maybe skew potentially this identifying as an atheist. I think that from what I know about Cārvāka philosophy, if you study it and feel that, okay, this resonates with how I see the world, then you are a Hindu atheist. But if you are saying you're an atheist because you've listened to Sam Harris or whatever other philosophical traditions there are that deny the existence of a higher power, if you say you're an atheist without that study, but more out of rejection of something as opposed to acceptance of a particular understanding of the world, I don't know if I'm making sense, but it's a little bit different to me in that you are more like affirmatively an atheist as opposed to being an atheist because you're rejecting something. So when you are going to reject something, you better understand what you're rejecting before doing that. In terms of what HAS
I'd like to add something to you.
go ahead.
All right. So this is how I explain atheists to people who are not well versed with atheism per se conceptually, or even leave aside Cārvāka. So what my experience has been, I define atheists in three broad forms. One are people like me who are Gnostics. So I don't even call myself an atheist, by the way. I never have, never will. I'm forced to call myself because if I say I'm Gnostic, they will like, huh? What is Gnostic? And then I have to go through the whole shebang. So I just say, okay, this is what I am, but I'm actually not that, but this is what I am. So I start with something I'm not, and then I work around it. So I call in India, we have three kinds of materialists in that sense. In India, we have the Marxist atheists who are, dyed in wool Marxists who believe in Marxism, and they have a positive doctrine of Marxism. Then you have what I call the wannabe atheists, who became atheists because they thought it was cool. Maybe their friend was an atheist in high school, or they watched a YouTube video of Richard Dawkins. Most probably Richard Dawkins and the God Delusion has had the biggest influence on most of these kids. Actually, not Sam Harris, because if you listen to Sam Harris, you realize, yaar, ye banda to 60% Buddhism bolta hai.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, I was like, wo to aadha to Buddhism bolta hai. So that's my thing. And plus, he'll drop in a little bit of Ramana, here and there, and he sneaks it in very smartly. Nobody understands that. Only people who have read Raman Maharishi and his Advaita,
exactly,
they will understand that, but the others will not. So my thing is that there are two kinds of atheists, and most probably you'll find in the academia, you'll find number one, the Marxists.
Right.
They have taken over. So their worldview is Hinduism needs to be destroyed. And
while they say Hinduism needs to be destroyed, in the same breath they'll say Hinduism is a modern construct, 19th century. I was
Right.
like, hang on, you want to destroy a 19th century construct? That's how much you're worried about it, scared about it.
Right.
I was like,
Right.
they make no sense. They contradict each other. But most atheists that I see are these wannabes. They just go where the wind blows,
Mhm.
especially outside India, in my experience. In India, I repeat, most of these agnostics and atheists, they don't even call themselves that.
Mhm.
It's only when you start talking about, like, so you believe in a deity, they're like, no. Oh, so you are an agnostic atheist. They're like, no, bhai, I'm Hindu. And it ends there. And they're
Right.
like, but how can you be Hindu? So the guy from outside, and I'm telling you, I have a unique experience. I am facing pushback for the first time in my life since I've become a vocal Cārvāka,
Mhm.
since the last 2 years, from neo-atheists outside the Hindu fold. They have a
Hmm.
huge problem with me.
Hmm.
Because they say, how dare you call yourself a Hindu? I say,
Well,
should I take your permission? Is it like a stamping authority where I go, sir, can I call myself a Hindu? Not allowed. Okay, sir, not calling myself Hindu.
are they the
And
Vatican of atheists, or?
yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's like a cult now. Atheism is also like a weird cult now. I take pride in the fact that I'm a Hindu.
Mhm.
Yes, I have a power. And they'll ask me stupid questions. And I have to share this with you because it's very important that you get a perspective of someone like me too.
Right.
HAF needs this perspective. So they'll ask me stupid questions. Where do your morals and ethics come from? Like every other Indian man, even I read the Bhagavad Gita. I just deny the divine parts. But
Right.
I think Krishna and his Nishkam Karma is amazing.
Mhm.
Like, why wouldn't I learn that? I mean, are you stupid? Even you should follow it. It
Right.
makes sense.
Right.
And then they'll make these stupid claims like, oh, we had this practice, that practice. Sati was rampant. And then I would be like, Sati existed, but hang on. There was a book called the Arthashastra where Chanakya had a section, and I've read the Arthashastra, and I was like, Chanakya had a section where he was discussing widow remarriage.
Mhm.
I was like, if everybody was being burnt, why the dude was talking about and had a detailed section on widow tea? I was like, I'm not saying Sati does not exist, so don't
Right.
get me wrong, because even the Greek travelers did talk about Sati. Megasthenes did talk about it. He
Mhm.
mentioned it.
Right.
I was like, yeah, it had some religious booga, but you have to understand Hinduism. So where I present them is, my doctrine of Hindu philosophy is, I believe the three qualifying criteria that I present to everybody is mutual respect, followed with reciprocity, because
Mhm.
otherwise it makes no sense, and ahimsa. So I say every darshan, whether it's my Cārvāka darshan, whether it's Advaita, whether it's Jaina, whether it's Bodha, whether it's anyone, Mimamsakas, Nyaya, Vaisheshik, if we believe in mutual respect, reciprocity, and ahimsa, the rest doesn't matter to me. We can live with each other as long as we follow these three rules. I'm not going to kill you. You're not going to kill me.
Mhm.
We will respect each other's space. We will debate fiercely. I will challenge every single claim in the Vedas. But I will live with you like an equal, and I will believe that you have an equal right on everything you have,
Mhm.
everything that exists around you and me. So this is my proposal every time. So do you think this makes sense?
I think it makes sense. I think you could add stuff to it. Maybe it's just semantics, but I would add pluralism. That undergirding that mutual respect is an acknowledgement that each one of us have different ways of understanding the world and interacting with it and understanding our purpose of why we're here. And you have that in the Vedas, right? Ekam sat vipraha bahuda vadanti. The other thing, and this may be a little contentious, is to say that I think you can still say that Nastika or Astika, you're inspired by the Vedas, either by accepting them or rejecting them, because you still have to, it still has to be there to say, well, I don't buy it. I'm going to go this way. But there's still that, right? And so I think I think that your basis is a good one, although interestingly enough, and well, actually, no, I think ahimsa is probably there. Where would you see dharma?
Well, dharma
Yeah.
is the root of everything, right? I mean,
Right.
dharma depends on, again, what definition of dharma we're talking about. And even with ahimsa, I don't want the Gandhian ahimsa, by the way. Hello. I want Krishna's ahimsa.
Right.
If anybody thinks they're going to punch me and I'm going to give them the other cheek, no, you're getting punched right back. I mean, that's my way, the Krishna's way. So my ahimsa is Krishna's ahimsa, not the Jain ahimsa. I am
Mhm.
totally opposed to, while the Jains can live their way. I mean, it's okay. When the mosquito comes, they can blow air at it. I mean, I will kill the mosquito. That's my way. I
Right.
mean, I don't want malaria and dengue. So that's a separate issue. But as far as dharma is concerned, I would say dharma is at the root of all of this.
Right.
So under dharma comes these, come these requirements of mutual respect, reciprocity, and Krishna's version of ahimsa, where basically, as the Indian nuclear policy states, no first use.
Mhm.
Right? The Indian nuclear policy is no first use. We will not
Right.
strike you first, but
Right.
if you strike us, we have every right to nuke the shit out of you, basically.
Right.
So that's how I came up with this template, because, and I'll tell you why I came up with this template, because a lot of young Gnostics who found out about me, like I was telling you offline, through the Atheist Republic. When I spoke to Armin Nawabi, a lot of Atheist Republic audiences of India, they came and explored me. They're like, hang on, this guy's interesting. So he calls himself a Hindu, but he doesn't say he's Hindu atheist. He says Gnostic. Now we want to explore what he's trying to say. And that's how the conversation started. And then a lot of these kids now actually talk to me. You'll be surprised, a lot of ex-Muslims in India,
Mm-hmm.
they'd say, bhai, we are Gnostic like you now.
Right. Right.
But their thing is, we don't want the Hindu tag. And I said, don't take the Hindu tag. It's okay. As long as you follow mutual respect, reciprocity, and ahimsa, and you basically follow the tenets, you don't even call yourself Hindu. It's okay. You can call yourself a Pastafarian for all I care. But you're basically a Hindu. In my definition, if you
Right.
follow these principles, you could go to a church too. Honestly, I don't care. You could go to a mosque. You could go to a church. If you follow these three core principles, and pluralism obviously is
It's
a
an
part of it.
extension or a different way of saying maybe mutual
So
respect,
if
right?
you follow these principles, I believe you're a Hindu. You could be white, black, brown, it doesn't matter.
So just fun fact, I guess, or personal fact, that my grandfather, my maternal side, I would routinely say he's Gnostic. So this is, it's been there. This is something that has been part of our society for generations. That's just a little side note. Where would you put in this kind of, and I don't know, maybe you put that in line with dharma, but an underlying unity of existence in one way or the other? Whether you say it's just particles, atoms and neutrons and protons, would that fit into your definition?
Well, for me, it's a simple thing. I look at everything from an evolutionary perspective, personally. So for me, where people will be like, where do your models come from? I was like, eventually your models come from human evolution, and at the end of the day, we are just a bunch of atoms or particles, and particles that have come together. So what unites me with other people, or a lot of times people say, right, how can you game theoretically justify mutual respect, ahimsa, and reciprocity? I was like, well, tit for tat is the best policy in terms of studies are concerned in game theory. Although you have Robert Sapolsky opposing it right now in his new book, but I still think the major consensus in the scientific community is that, at a game theoretic level, tit for tat makes the most sense. But my point is, that's why I made the caveat of Krishna's ahimsa in that sense. So what unites me with everybody else is basically, that's when I say dharma unites me with everyone else in India. That what is common with all of us in different darshanas in Hinduism is our quest for the truth. Now we are all trying to find out what the truth is, what the core reason of our existence. We all look at it from a different perspective. I, as a Gnostic, am only concerned with the Laukic level, because I deny or negate the Paramarthic level. But I am not an anti-theist.
Right.
Or I'm not anti-astic. My whole thing is, while you guys are discussing the Paramarthic level, I could care less about it. What I'm concerned with is, how do we live together as a society where we have more freedoms,
Right.
where we have genuine discussions, where I don't want to be in a position where, what, I've seen Christian and Muslim households where an atheist and a theist cannot get married, because the fundamental incompatibility between those two faiths is just, it's not breachable. It is just not breachable.
Right.
But I don't want that to happen with him. I mean, my wife is not a Nastik.
Right.
She's the Arya Samaji. So it's okay. I mean, she doesn't even care about my Nastik nature. I mean, I'm a Nastik, but my mom does Diwali Puja and she'll be like, come up and I'll go up and I'll bow down to the idol. What do I lose from that? I just look at it as a cultural continuity.
Mm-hmm.
And even if my mom and dad are not there, sometimes, they're with my brother in the United States. And when the Diwali Puja is to be done, I will sit in my house temple and I will do the Diwali Puja. I'll chant the mantra too. I'll do the whole,
well, that's part of mutual respect in some sense, right? On a very micro level of the family, that we routinely do things to make our parents happy or to make our spouse happy. I mean, in that sense, I think it's hard for us Hindus to have like such a big hang up on things in some sense, because inbuilt into our tradition is this pluralism. Go find the answer, find your purpose.
Yeah.
So I don't think I can disagree with you, but I do encourage you, if it's not already in the works, to write a book, because this is, to have that philosophical underpinning so that you distinguish yourself, that it's not a free-for-all either, right? Oftentimes we talk about that does the pluralism that's in Hinduism, does that mean a free-for-all? No, it doesn't. There are certain I don't even call them values, but there is in some sense some structure, right? Whether we call it dharma, ahimsa, satya, right? We do have certain structure. And around that structure, there's the freedom to interpret both in a literal sense, but also in a sense of being, of how you approach every single situation in your life. But I would highly encourage that you write a book if it's not already in the works.
Well, I've been I've been told by many people. Actually, Sachin was the first guy who had forced me. He's like, I'm too lazy, honestly, and that's my biggest problem. I mean, I read a lot, but I'm not good, and I just think I'm a very crappy writer. I don't know why I think like that. Like, I will speak. If you call me, I could speak for 5 hours. I can interact with an audience. I can make them laugh. I can do all of that. That I can cover, but I don't know with writing. But I actually have that in mind. I want to introduce a positive doctrine of Neo Cārvāka Darshan, because whatever we know about Cārvāka Darshan is also from a Purva Paksha, which I don't think so is a fair thing to Cārvāks, because what we know about Cārvāks is what Shankaracharya said, or what the Sarva Darshan Sangraha said, or like Madhava Vidyaranya said, or maybe what the Buddhists said, or what the Jainas said. We don't know what the Cārvāks said about themselves. Because even the only Lokayatika book, which is the Tattva Paplava Simha by Jeresi Bhatta, it's written in the Vedanta style, where he's basically taking a mickey out of everyone else. So he doesn't get his position in that book. He just says, you said this, wrong. You said that, wrong. So the problem with Cārvāka Darshan is, unlike the Marxist atheists, they have a positive doctrine. You have Das Kapital, you have Hegel, you have Hegelian dialectic, and you have all these things. So the Marxist atheist can actually say, hang on, these are my books, read them. The wannabe atheist can show Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, hang on, read this. The people like where I sit in, and where most Hindu skeptics, atheists, agnostics sit in, actually, they don't have a book. They have not sat down, and eventually maybe I'm the only guy who may have to write it, because literally I've not met anyone who thinks like a Cārvāka. They might call themselves a Cārvāka, but I actually think like one. Like, my default reaction is Pratyaksh Praman. No,
So what I would, even if you're not going to write a book, even if it's 10 principles, start there, because without a positive doctrine, you get a lot of folks who are saying they're atheists more from that negative doctrine that I talked about, right? Like, if you don't have a knowledge gap and you're just going to say, well, I don't want to have to go to Monday every Thursday, and that's what my mom makes me do, or that's what's expected in my family, and therefore I'm an atheist. But have it be something that can inform a way of being for people, so that they can approach the world, their relationships, their interactions, and it brings them a sense of freedom. Because without that, I don't know that rejection of things is conducive to freedom in that sense, right? That when you do it from a place of knowledge, I think that it can be freeing. But it's like kind of being angry, right? If you let go, it's done. You're not holding on to it anymore. But being angry or holding hatred for something or someone, it just keeps gnawing on you. And even though you want to forget it, you can't. So in that sense, I think some sort of positive doctrine, even if it just starts with 10 points or what your definition was, that's a good starting point. Yeah, writing is hard. Writing is not for everyone. But it's important to get these principles articulated, because if you don't, then it's going to get all bundled up in the Abrahamic understanding of atheism, which is very different than what you're talking about.
It is very different, and I have a unique position of actually making these statements is because I actually had the journey personally from a wannabe atheist to exploring Marxism at an intellectual level and totally rejecting it the moment I read it. And then I because a lot of people think that I've not read Dawkins, I've actually read the entire neo-atheist pantheon, every single book, all of them I've read. And that's when I realized I'm not them.
Right.
People, how every atheist uses that line. Okay, how did you become an atheist? I read the Bible. They say that.
Yeah.
They ask me, how did you become a Cārvāka? I say I read Dawkins.
Right.
I became a Cārvāka when I read Dawkins, and I realized I'm not him. I just cannot relate to Richard Dawkins and his life experiences. I cannot relate to Christopher Hitchens and his militant attitude towards religions, because I just did not face that hostility growing up. And I'm not becoming a wannabe hostile guy because Christopher Hitchens is famous or was famous. I mean, he was a great man. Don't get me wrong. I'm a huge fan. I'm a diehard Christopher Hitchens fan. I mean, some of his lines are just legendary stuff. Like one female I remember in the event, or the guy, I don't remember, he said, "Oh, you're hurting my feelings." And Hitchens just goes, looks at her, and I'm still waiting for you to make a point. And it's just stuff that legends are made of. So Hitchens is a great man.
Right.
But yeah, I do get your point. And I'm in a unique position because I've gone through the grind myself, and I am a humble student of philosophy, and I love reading philosophy, and that's my passion. So maybe someday, but enough about me. So one more point somebody actually made when you were talking about
quick, I just want to make a point before we leave this topic, is that we have at HAF worked with humanist organizations and atheist organizations in advancing human rights and civil rights. So again, regardless of where we might stand on a philosophical or ethical level, there's still always opportunities to come together. So here, the separation of church and state is interpreted very differently than what secularism is in India. So those are, but that's where we have been able to come together. Or Bangladesh, where there was, beheadings of atheists. That was a place where we could come together and work. So, okay, on to your next question. Sorry about that. I just wanted
I just wanted to mention, someone on the live chat had made a very interesting, that is like another thing that can unite all of us from all darshanas is all of them originated in India. I was like, yeah, that's a good point. We are all tied to that land, whether a Cārvāka or a Ajivika. Like, just a fun fact for people may not realize this, even on the subject of free will. I mean, Ajivikas were also materialists, but Ajivikas denied free will. Cārvākas accepted free will. So even within the materialists, there was differences. I mean, these are subtle differences between in the Indian pantheon as such. Obviously, Ajivikas are totally finished. There is just no Ajivikas. I think they later on graduated into Jainism and Buddhism. I think the Jains and the Bodhas were basically original Ajivikas that later on just migrated into those darshanas. But anyways, I think I've taken a lot of your time now.
On the India point, I will say that that's part of the reason why we find ourselves at the Hindu American Foundation still delving into issues related to India, because what happens there on the ground does affect how we're perceived here, and very often there are policies that government policies in India that don't necessarily provide Hindus the same freedoms that other traditions, members of other religious communities do. And so we speak up on that as well. So in that sense, we define India as a sacred homeland. You might want to argue on the word sacred, but whatever it's a homeland in that sense of our philosophy and tradition, and therefore, regardless of whether you are a Hindu of Caucasian descent, a Latino, or 6 generations out and from Trinidad, India remains that sacred homeland.
No, I actually can get the sacredness. I mean, sacredness does not every time have to evoke some divine concept. It could actually evoke a sense of awe in you.
Sure, absolutely.
So I mean, even a diehard materialist like Richard Dawkins says that when I listen to the church bells, I get a sense of awe because that's his culture.
Right.
He might have destroyed the God of the Bible by calling him a misogynist, that, whatever. He had a big paragraph where he called him the God of the Bible, especially of the Old Testament, is a sexist, misogynist, patriarchal, this, that, and he had his huge line in his book. But still, he likes the sound of the church.
Yeah.
So there you go. So that's the thing. So anyways, I've taken a lot of your time. So guys, as you see, this is the background why I have covered these different topics today. Let me tell you why. Because Suhag had already had an amazing chat with Sham on the Sham Sharma show. So I did not want to repeat the questions that Sham had asked her. So I made it a point that I did not discuss anything which Sham had covered, because most of the things when it comes to the California textbook row, or a lot of the activism HAF has done, was already covered on Sham's show. So I wanted to touch upon the more cultural and the lived experience side of Hindus in America. And I think that was very important, because I think you could not touch that on Sham's show.
Yeah.
So, in case you guys are wondering, yaar isne HAF ke bare mein baat ki, magar HAF samajh nahi pada pura. So this is my recommendation. If you want to understand that side of HAF, please go on Sham Sharma's show and watch Suhag's chat, which was literally yesterday. I think.
I know. I stacked the 2 on top of each other.
Yeah. So that's the thing. So go and discuss that. And if you want to understand the experience of the American, lifestyle, or the American Hindu, or I think the American Hindu and the Canadian Hindu. I just have one question, Suhag. Do you guys have any branches in Canada?
We don't. Yet, the funny thing is, we routinely, when some big issue comes up, we're asked, Canada and in India, when are you going to start a chapter here to advocate for Hindus here? But we don't right now. We're firmly rooted in America. But if anyone wants to start something in their respective countries, I think there's a lot of lessons learned that we can offer.
All right. I think because the Canadian experience and the American experience pretty much overlap, so I think it makes total sense for you guys to open a chapter there.
Yeah.
So anyways, guys, so here you go. So if you, once again, I want to thank all of you for all the super chats. I tried to cover all the questions you asked from the super chats. Some of you, Poonam Abhi, you gave me the super chats. You didn't ask the questions. I'm sorry. Whatever questions you asked, Poonam, I asked them to Suhag. So Suhag, once again, thanks a lot for coming on the podcast. It was amazing. And guys, just one thing before we go, if you want to know a lot about HAF and their work, so as you see, I've just shared the screen on the podcast live right now. The website is www.hafsite.org. I have shared the link of the website in the description of the podcast too, but I'm sharing it right now on the screen. As you see, you can see the name, the address right now. Go to the website, donate to HAF, because there is a very famous line by Kabir, I think, Bhukhe pet bhajan na hove Gopala. So, Hindus need to put their money where their mouth is. So please, Hindus, if you want HAF to do this, to do that, to do X, to do Y, to do Z, put your money where your mouth is, because bina paise ke kuch nahi hota. Please donate to HAF. If you can't donate, at least download their material. It's available on their website. All you need to do is click a button, download the material, read the material, and start discussing this when you meet your friends in America, when you meet non-Hindu people. Talk about these issues, share the Hindu perspective, and start giving a Hindu perspective on American issues. You should do that, because the Americans should know that there are these people out there who have an opinion on things that happen in America as average citizens. So once again, Suhag, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Yeah, and guys, on that note, I'll take your leave. Please share the discussion, subscribe to the podcast, like if you have enjoyed this discussion. And until then, namaskar. See you on the other side. Take care. Goodbye. Good night.